Julian Lennon once confessed to the deep-seated resentment he held for one woman, an anger so profound it simmered for years. It was a rage born from a childhood fractured by fame, abandonment, and a betrayal that felt absolute. He was the son of a legend, the boy who inspired one of history's most iconic songs. Yet he often found himself on the outside looking in, watching his own life get rewritten by forces he couldn't control. But who was this woman who so profoundly altered his family's story? And what could have happened to provoke such powerful feelings from the son of a man who preached peace and love to the world? This isn't just a story about a broken family. It's about a boy's painful search for his father's love and the woman who stood in the middle of it all. We're about to explore Julian Lennon's journey, from a hidden childhood to bitter resentment, and finally toward a fragile and very complicated peace. To understand Julian Lennon's pain, you have to go back to the beginning. Before the world screamed his father's name, John Lennon was just a student at the Liverpool College of Art. It was there, in a calligraphy class, that he met a talented artist named Cynthia Powell. Their connection was instant. A classic, art school romance that blossomed right as rock and roll was taking over Liverpool. Cynthia was drawn to John's rebellious spirit and his undeniable talent. He was the magnetic center of a group of guys who were about to conquer the world. But their relationship had its shadows. John, even as a young man, carried the scars of his own tough childhood, which often came out as jealousy and a volatile temper. Years later, in a candid 1980 interview, John admitted to his past aggression, saying, "I used to be cruel to my woman and physically. Any woman, I was a hitter." It was a darkness Cynthia navigated, caught between her love for him and these unsettling flashes of anger. Their lives became a whirlwind. As the Beatles' fame exploded, their personal lives got messy. When Cynthia found out she was pregnant in 1962, the news sparked a mix of panic and resolve. John, despite his own fears, insisted they do the right thing. They were married. Quietly in August 1962, a union their manager, Brian Epstein, demanded they keep secret. The logic was cold but clear. A married Beatle with a kid could shatter the fantasy for millions of adoring fans. On April 8, 1963, John Charles Julian Lennon was born. For Cynthia, it was a moment of pure joy, but for John, it was another complication, in a life spinning out of control. He was mostly gone, caught in the relentless storm of Beatlemania, touring, recording, and dealing with global stardom. Cynthia and Julian were tucked away, living a life almost entirely separate from the one John led in the public eye. For young Julian, his father was like a ghost, a face on TV, a voice on the radio. He'd see him in fleeting moments between tours, but there was little chance to form a real bond. When John was home, he was often distant, retreating into himself. Cynthia did her best to create a stable home, but the reality was they were on the periphery of John's world. Julian later recalled that after his dad left when he was young, it was just him and his mom, and they had almost nothing to do with the Beatles. Despite the distance, there were glimpses of a family. Cynthia was close with the other Beatles, wives, Pattie Boyd and Maureen Starkey, and they formed a small, supportive circle. Julian was a child of this inner circle, yet he remained separate from its core. The world saw John Lennon as a witty, charismatic leader of a cultural revolution. But behind closed doors, the reality was far more complex. This early period of hidden family life laid the groundwork for the profound sense of abandonment that would define Julian's youth, long before a new force would enter their lives and shatter everything. The fragile world Cynthia had built for. Her son came to a sudden, devastating end in 1966. The disruption had a name: Yoko Ono. John Lennon, who was searching for meaning beyond Beatlemania, met the Japanese avant-garde artist at a London gallery. He was captivated by her art, her intellect, and her unique worldview. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Their connection quickly grew from an intellectual friendship into an intense, all-consuming affair. For John, Yoko represented a new beginning, an escape from the life he felt trapped in. He became utterly devoted to her, and in his passion, he seemed to cast everyone else aside. The discovery was heartbreaking for Cynthia. She returned from a trip to Greece to find Yoko in her home, wearing her bathrobe, sitting next to John. The message was clear. Their marriage was over. The divorce, finalized in November 1968, was a messy, public affair that showed the world the Beatles' perfect image was cracking. For 5-year-old Julian, it was the moment his world imploded. His father was simply gone. As Julian later recalled, his dad literally disappeared off the face of the planet. John and Yoko's new relationship was intense and public. They launched peace campaigns and became counterculture icons. But for Julian, watching from the sidelines, it was a painful spectacle. He said, "He and Yoko Ono were deeply and publicly in love, and I felt as if my mom and I had been cast aside. The feeling of abandonment was immediate and profound." John moved to the United States with Yoko in 1971, creating an even greater physical and emotional chasm. For years, Julian had almost no contact with his father. He was left in England with his mother, trying to understand why his dad had chosen a new life that seemingly had no room for him. In the middle of this turmoil, an unexpected figure stepped in. Paul McCartney, who was fond of Cynthia and Julian, was heartbroken by the breakup. He drove out to visit them one day in 1968, worried about the little boy caught in the crossfire. On the drive, a melody and a simple phrase came to him. "Hey, Jules." He wanted to tell Julian that he could take a sad song and make it better. That song, of course, became Hey Jude. Julian didn't even know the song was for him until years later. It was an incredible act of kindness from his Uncle Paul, but Julian has admitted to a love-hate relationship with the song, calling it a stark and dark reminder of actually what happened. The irony was not lost on Julian. While his own father was writing songs about peace and love for the world, it was Paul McCartney who wrote a song to comfort his son. The arrival of Yoko Ono wasn't just the introduction of a stepmother. For Julian, it was the catalyst for his abandonment and the start of a deep, lasting resentment that would fester for decades. The years after the divorce were a masterclass in emotional neglect. While John Lennon was reinventing himself as a peace activist and doting husband to Yoko, Julian was navigating a childhood defined by his father's absence. The move to New York created an ocean of distance. Visits were incredibly rare. The pain of this abandonment was sharpened by the birth of his half-brother Sean in 1975. John's approach to being a father the second time around was completely different. He famously took a 5-year break from music to be a house husband, dedicating himself to raising Sean. For Julian, watching from thousands of miles away, this was a particularly cruel blow. He saw his father giving Sean the time, attention, and love he had always craved. The contrast wasn't just in John's actions, but in his words. In a now infamous 1980 Playboy interview, John described the difference between his two sons with brutal honesty. He called Sean a planned child, but his description of Julian's conception was callous. He said Julian came out of a bottle of whiskey on a Saturday night. The quote was widely publicized, becoming a public brand on Julian, a declaration from his own father that he was an accident. Cynthia was horrified, calling it untrue and deeply hurtful. For Julian, it was public confirmation of his deepest fears. He was the unwanted child. This public hypocrisy became a central theme of Julian's pain. He couldn't reconcile the image of John Lennon, the man singing "All You Need Is Love," with the father who had emotionally abandoned him. "I have to say that, from my point of view, I felt he was a hypocrite," Julian stated. Dad could talk about peace and love out loud to the world, but he could never show it to the people who supposedly meant the most to him, his wife and son. There was, however, a brief period of hope. During the mid-1970s, John and Yoko separated for a time John called his lost weekend. He was in a relationship with their assistant, May Pang, who actively encouraged John to reconnect with Julian. For about 18 months, they saw each other regularly, and a real bond started to form. "Dad and I got on a great deal better then," Julian recalled. "We had a lot of fun, laughed a lot, and had a great time in general. For a short while, he was just Dad, but it didn't last. John reconciled with Yoko, and the wall went back up. The visits stopped. Julian has said he felt that Yoko became a gatekeeper, making contact difficult. Whether it was John's choice or Yoko's influence, the result was the same. Julian was on the outside again, left with only the memory of what could have been, on. December 8, 1980, John Lennon was murdered. For a 17-year-old Julian, the shock was immense and deeply complicated. The father he had only just started to reconnect with was gone forever, leaving a universe of unresolved issues. Any hope for unity in grief quickly dissolved into conflict. When John's will was read, it was a final, painful blow. The vast majority of his estate, estimated to be worth hundreds of millions, was left in a trust for Yoko Ono and Sean. While a small trust fund of $100,000 had been established for Julian in the divorce, he was effectively left out of the massive inheritance. For Julian, this felt like a posthumous act of exclusion. Yoko was named the sole executor, giving her complete control over John's image, his legacy, and his wealth. What followed was a long and bitter legal battle that stretched for nearly 16 years. Julian was forced to sue his father's estate for what he considered his rightful share. Finally, in 1996, they reached an out-of-court settlement, reportedly for around $20 million. While it was a huge sum, Julian has said he didn't feel it was fair, but it was better than continuing an exhausting court fight. The financial battle was devastating, but the fight for his father's memory was perhaps even more hurtful. To add insult to injury, many of John's personal items began to appear at auction houses, including postcards and letters John had written to Julian as a child. In a cruel twist of irony, Julian had to use the settlement money to buy back his own childhood memories. He said the postcards meant the most because they were tangible proof that his father had been thinking of him. This period cemented Julian's deep resentment toward Yoko Ono. He saw her not just as the woman who broke up his family, but as the gatekeeper who controlled every aspect of his father's legacy. The fight for his inheritance became a proxy war for the love and recognition he felt he'd been denied his entire life. For decades, the relationship between Julian Lennon and Yoko Ono was a cold war of resentment and legal disputes. Forgiveness seemed impossible. But as the years passed, an unexpected catalyst began to slowly thaw the ice. Julian's profound love for his half-brother, Sean. Despite their different childhoods and a 12-year age gap, Julian and Sean forged a strong, genuine bond. They connected over the unique and often heavy experience of being John Lennon's sons. Their supportive relationship became a priority for Julian. He came to a difficult but mature realization. Continuing his war with Yoko would inevitably hurt Sean, the one person in that fractured family with whom he had a truly loving relationship. In a moment of remarkable grace, Julian explained his change of heart. "I think the key point to all of this, for me at least, has been Sean," he said. "If I hurt Sean's mother, then I hurt Sean. It's a roundabout way of thinking about things, but because I love Sean so much, I just don't want to hurt him." This wasn't about forgiving Yoko, but about protecting Sean. It was a conscious choice to let go of the consuming anger, because the relationship with his brother was too valuable to sacrifice. This shift has led to what can only be called a fragile peace. Publicly, they've appeared together at events, like the 2010 opening of Julian's photography exhibition, Photos from that night showing Julian, Yoko, and Sean smiling together were a powerful symbol of how far they'd come from the bitter court battles. Julian has acknowledged that things have softened. As the years have gone by, she's relaxed a bit. And I have too, he said. That pain has been worked through. We can be normal again. Still, cordial is probably the best word for their relationship. It's a peace born of maturity, not a deep familial warmth. The scars are still there. Julian still carries the weight of his past, the pain of his father's neglect, and the bitterness of the estate battle. The wounds have faded, but they haven't vanished. Yoko herself once acknowledged the dynamic, suggesting that if Julian were too friendly with her, it might hurt his deep loyalty to his mother, Cynthia, who passed away in 2015. The story of Julian Lennon and Yoko Ono is not a simple tale of a wicked stepmother and a wronged son. It's a messy, complicated story of love, loss, fame, and profound emotional baggage. It's the story of a boy who grew up in the shadow of a global icon, fighting for a piece of the attention his father gave so freely to the world, and later to another son. Julian's deep resentment for Yoko wasn't born in a vacuum. It was forged in his parents' divorce, fueled by years of feeling abandoned and solidified by a will that made him feel written out of his own father's story. For Julian, Yoko became the face of every loss he'd suffered. Yet time and love can reshape even the most fractured landscapes. The fragile peace Julian has found is not a storybook ending. It's a testament to his own emotional growth. His love for his brother Sean became a bridge across a chasm of bitterness. It allowed him to lay down his arms, not in surrender, but in a quiet act of grace. The wounds may never fully heal, but a form of resolution has been found, a complicated truce that protects the most important thing, the bond between two brothers. Julian Lennon's journey has been shaped by immense pain and a long road to peace. How do you think his complicated relationship with his father ultimately shaped his ability to heal? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories like this one.